I graduated from Georgia State with my master's in family sociology in 1999. No idea what I wanted to do. I was doing my thesis, and I had gone through a divorce myself and thought, you know, maybe I'll see what this conflict resolution thing is about, because I didn't have much of that when I went through my divorce in 1990. And so I decided to do my thesis on divorce mediation just because it sounded interesting, and got involved in the DeKalb County Dispute Resolution Center, which, by the way, if any of you want to be mediators, is a great way to get your feet wet. They let me sit in on mediations, which is rare, to do my thesis. And then I ended up doing divorce mediation there 4 or 5 times a week. Then, through meeting people, I ended up being asked to do some divorce education in the court systems, and I started doing that. Then people started coming up to me saying, do you do counseling? And I thought, no, but I should, so I went back to school. Now keep in mind, I came from Las Vegas. I didn't start my college career until I was 30. So I got a divorce and had 2 kids. So, you know, I was an older student. Went back to school, got my counseling degree, and got licensed as a counselor, and then started doing a lot of counseling. And because I was in the court system, I got to know the judges. Next thing you know, I was getting court-ordered stuff. And I just want to say that I didn't plan on any of that. But mediation skills are probably some of the best skills you can use in any field. So because I think I went through this career transformation starting with mediation, I think that's how I ended up being successful. I teach the divorcing parents classes in DeKalb and Gwinnett counties. I have the nonprofit that does that, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. And we see about 3,000 to 4,000 parents a year. So I've met 30,000 to 40,000 divorcing parents, which a lot of my therapy business comes from there. I also do something called parent coordination, which you have to be extremely masochistic to want to do that. That means that after a case is over, the judge says, you guys are so crazy, I'm sending you to her to make sure you don't stay crazy. And so I actually work with couples after divorce, trying to keep them from fighting and giving them structure and kind of coaching them, which is oftentimes a 2-year process to get high conflict couples to actually just develop any new habit that keeps them out of each other's hair so the kids can survive. And that's where my heart is. My heart's with kids. So that's kind of a little bit background about me. I now have 2 adult children and I have a grandbaby, so I'm done parenting. But today we're going to talk, and I don't have much time at all, and when they said I had 45 minutes, I started to laugh. I was like, okay. Because this is a big topic. Gender issues is a huge topic. Any of you have any conflict with the opposite sex in your families ever? And has it ever confounded you why you have it? Sure. And so, unlike I just said in the panel thing here, and somebody said they use this at home, and I remember when I got my mediation training many years ago, one of the things the mediator trainer said is, don't try this at home. There's no way you can be unbiased about your own conflict, right? So you can't really mediate. I tried that. I had teenagers at the time, and I tried to mediate my teenagers' conflict, and I forget it. You go to your room. That's about all I could get to. So it is hard to do at home. It is hard to do in personal situations. However, I think your personal situations inform you. Had I not had the pain of going through divorce myself with children, I would find myself very, very frustrated with the parents that I work with now, because I wouldn't be able to relate. So you try to stay as unbiased as you can, but you do bring your personal situations in. So you have to kind of be thinking of that if you're going to do any kind of domestic or family mediation. I would like to write on the board what you think, and how many of you are already mediators? You do divorce mediation, or, okay, good, so you're somewhat familiar. I want you to tell me what you think are some gender issues in divorce mediation, and then I'm hoping you say all the right things because then I'll address them. Anybody? Those of you who've done
bullying.
Between men and women?
Yes.
Who's doing the bullying?
She is.
Oh. Okay. So cross-gender bullying, is that what you call it? Okay. What else? What gender issues might come up I know we're talking about kids and parenting and who gets the house and all that. Can't think of any?
Well, sometimes particularly with older couples, the wife has never worked outside the home.
Okay, so financial differences. Okay. Parenting differences. Okay, say a little bit more about that with regard to gender.
Parenting style differs. Sometimes I see moms as more nurturing, perhaps.
Okay.
Fathers as more strong-handed. It can also go the opposite way. Moms can be more disciplined.
So between dads and moms, we have differences. What else?
Not only that, but I speak to people sometimes with disputing whose responsibility it is. You know, the moms a lot of times are taking more charge in like making sure the children are going to all their appointments and after school programs and stuff like that. You know, and you know, one parent will look at it like it's the other parent's responsibility.
So who's responsible for what? Okay. What else? Talk about money, talk about parenting. Think there's any gender differences in how people feel they're being treated by the court system with regard to divorce mediation? How? What would that difference be?
Bias.
Okay. Court system bias. What is that bias?
Custody bias.
In what way?
Tending to believe that just based on gender, one parent is better than the other.
Who?
The mother.
Okay, you're allowed to say it. That fathers somehow, I always say fathers feel that they are guilty until proven innocent as parents. And mothers come into the mediation room feeling like if they walk out of there without custody, their mother, their sister, their grandmother, everybody is going to think they're a terrible parent. Huge bias or feeling of bias that people come into. What else? Can you think of anything else? Yes.
There's an emotional aspect to it as well. Women are seen as more emotive than men.
Okay.
So sometimes we feel that we have to, you know, walk on eggshells. The royal we, of course.
The royal we, exactly, which you were taught not to use, right? Can you think of anything else? What about property?
Ownership areas go along with the financial differences, and if there's a primary source of income, there could be conflict with regards to ownership of
Wish
property.
I had $1 for every time a guy says, I worked, I paid the house payment, my house. But I put you through medical school. Right? I watched the kids and took care of the house a while. You know. So career differences obviously come into play as well. Now, are these real or are they mythical? They're real? Let me go over to my turn this on this side. Here's a few old, what I would call gender myths that I discover in divorce mediation. Infants and toddlers need their mothers more than their fathers. This is a strong belief out there. So maybe even my judges that feel that way. A lot of mothers that I see, very emotional issue. Boys need to be raised by their fathers. So these are parenting issues. Teenage girls need their mothers more than their fathers. Mothers are more nurturing than their fathers. Dad's best role is to work and pay child support. This comes up a lot. I just had someone tell me that I had a client who said he's been, because he telecommutes, he's able to stay at home 4 days a week or whatever, and he's been raising his 4-year-old since that child was born. But when they got to the courtroom, the judge pretty much said, you need to go get a better job and go to work. And that child needs to be in daycare or whatever, because you're the guy. You're supposed to be, because the man made, I don't know, $40,000 a year, but he was telecommuting, he was taking care of his child. Mom was out there making a similar amount, and the judge pretty much ordered him to go get a better job. And he's obviously crushed by that, because he's been the nurturing parent. Kids do best when their parents are more alike. I hear that a lot when I teach the class. One parent's very frustrated with the other parent because they do everything different from me. And isn't that terrible for the kids that the kids have this completely different parent? And I'm thinking, well, were you exactly the same when you were married? I don't know, think back to your parents. Were your parents exactly the same? I doubt it. You get something different from your parents, don't you? So let's kind of look at these one by one. The fact is that babies have unique needs, and I want to share some. Oh, before I get to that, let's talk about all of these things, these old gender myths. Your job as a mediator then is to move people from their positional bargaining to what we call interest-based negotiation. You know the difference between a position and an interest? I was working with a couple just last night doing some mediation, and they had all the plan all worked out. They got hung up on a couple of really unimportant things. And what Dad said to me is, I want this because if it doesn't show this on paper, then it looks like I'm not an important dad or not an important parent. And Mom wanted it for the same reason. And I said, well, this has nothing to do with your involvement with your child. This has to do with semantics. It has to do with what is codified in the agreement. That's an interest. The position is, I want it. I want that thing. But the interest is, why do you want that thing? And can you get that in some other way? And so as you look at all of these very abstract concepts, most of the time, they're positions based on interests. The interests are underneath the position. So it's up to you to get people off of the position and underneath the interest. Dad says, I can change a diaper. Mom says, but the baby needs me every hour. Now, it is true, research does support the fact that infants have attachment issues. I'm going to read you some things from some of the research. Attachment is formed when a parent has been actively involved. So if you have actively involved parents, infants are going to attach to them. When you disrupt these attachments, they're a problem because babies have a limited ability to remember their attachments. So the attachments need to be consistent. Frequent contact with both parents is best. Every few days is possible. So babies, in order to attach, need to frequently be around a parent. So we don't want dad to not have the opportunity to attach. Overnights should be with the primary caregiver only in the beginning, and then gradually increase time with the other parent because of routines and feeding and scheduling and sleeping and waking need to be as routine as possible. And then that security in the routine is paramount. And then failure to thrive can result from too many changes and disruptions in the infant's caregiving schedule and routine. So once you know all that stuff, the importance of the development of the baby, how are you going to help parents understand that when they come in and say, well, I can change a diaper, well, the baby needs me every hour. So it's hard. So research is important to understand. I'm going to get to what you do about that in a minute. The fact about girls and dads, this is very interesting. We all kind of know that girls need the attention of their fathers at a very young age, actually prepubescent, because girls need to have a non-sexual man in their life before they're ready to have sex. You know why? Why that would be? Because otherwise, if they don't have a connection with a father figure in their lives, then their first connection with the man tends to be sexual. And then they view themselves then through as sexual beings with men. And so it's an interesting concept. In fact, back in 1999, Vanderbilt University did a study and said that the girls who didn't have a father figure in their lives, whose fathers were absent or they were completely disconnected, tended to go through puberty sooner, and they were more likely to get pregnant. And there was a physiological reason they found, is that what they suspect is that those girls, when they encountered a man who was a sexual being and not a father being to them, pheromones were released. And there was a pheromone interaction between the girl and the man, and that caused her body to kind of advance into puberty quicker, which I think is extremely interesting. And so it's very, very important that a man, a father, bonds with his 10-year-old. They say that 10 to 14-year-old period is extremely important, that he's not just there, even in married parent homes, but that he bonds. Of course, bonding with the same-sex parent is important as well. Many mothers work and have their own income, so this whole concept that dad just needs to be out there working and paying child support, mom needs to be home, that worked in the 50s, or did it? My mom's famous for saying that, oh, things were so much better in the 50s. Were they? They were for her. She had my dad, they've been married 60 years, and they're like best friends. She forgets, though, the lady down the street might have been getting beaten up by her husband and had no recourse, right? So I don't think things have changed that much. That was the culture back then, but we have a completely different culture now, don't we? Less than a quarter of mothers are stay-at-home moms now. So that, and 1/4 of them are single parents, and 48% are out there in the workforce, and I think 2% are stay-at-home dads or something like that. So stay-at-home dads are pretty rare still, but they're increasing because of telecommuting and our ability to work without having to leave the house. Fathers can nurture too. Because of those flexible schedules, because of being able to work for companies that allow you to work from home. I have a grandbaby, like I said, my daughter had a baby a year ago, and she and her husband have been dealing with that, and my mom and my daughter and her husband got together one day, and this was right when the baby started to eat solid food, and we were observing my daughter and her husband having a little bit of a tiff about whether she should get carrots first or get beans next, or whatever. And my mom and I laughed and thought, wow, I don't ever remember talking to my husband about whether the baby ever was going to get carrots or beans. But fathers are involved now, aren't they? And I thought that was kind of a cool thing, that he was that involved, that he was like, no, I heard that you should, he's done all this research about baby food, you should feed the beans first before the carrots. And we got a laugh at it, but at the same time, I found that to be an interesting cultural change, that men are very involved and want to be involved now in the basic caretaking. Now, as a mediator, you've got a dad in front of you, and he's trying to convince you that I've been the primary caretaker. I am a nurturing parent. In fact, I think I'm more nurturing than she is. She doesn't even know what to do with this child. I'm the one who always calms the child down. How are you going to know if that's true if you're hearing a different story from mom? How do you determine that? It's actually a trick question. Because as a mediator, that's not your job. And that's what you can get into if you're not careful, is trying to get into that fact-finding who is and who isn't, as if you're the judge and jury and going to be able to make that decision. You can't make that decision. So what I often do is when I hear those stories from dad, I start asking a lot of questions. I'm checking out this story. Okay, well, I want to be there. I want 50-50 custody. I want to be there every week. And then I find out he has a job where he travels, 4 or 5 times a month. Okay, let's talk about the practicalities. I just had a case like this. What he wanted was his was his interest. But his position had to be, well, I really can only do this, but I don't want it to say on paper that I'm only a weekend dad. That was the interest. And we had to get around that in other ways. So a lot of times you can get around that by just asking lots of questions and going to the practical. Usually, practically, they can't do exactly what they think they want it to say on paper. Another fact is dad and mom can be different. Let's go back to your parents. I know when I was little and I fell off my bike and I hurt my knee, who did I want to go see? I wanted my mom. She was going to rub it and clean it and give me a popsicle and hug me and tell me I was going to be okay. My dad was going to say, get up and keep going. I needed both, didn't I? We need both perspectives. Sometimes it's the dad that's more nurturing, and it's the mom who's going to say, get up and get going, and get back on the horse. And I still have that, I still need that. When I want somebody to agree with me, I call my mom. When I do solve a problem, I call my dad, because we have that benefit. The problem with divorce is once you divorce, once couples divorce, you still have nurturing parent, and you still have practical parent, but kids don't have instant access to them. So what usually happens is parents polarize, and then they start to point the finger. You're the drill sergeant parent. You're a control freak. You're too lackadaisical. You're too emotional. And then the kids begin to think they have a home that's comforting and a home that's too tough. Well, really, you're just getting who mom is and who dad is. So sometimes, rather than, and it's oftentimes more personality involved than it is gender involved, but parents don't talk about it that way. So sometimes you have to do that kind of education. You know, I can understand why you would think that the other parent's home is like this because it's so different from you, but kids really can tolerate the differences. They tolerated the differences when you were together. They needed both of those. So don't expect the other parent to be just like you. That's not exactly going to be good for the kids. They need a balance of your personalities and what you bring to the table as a man or as a woman, whatever that might be. So let's talk about, I'm going to take you one by one through these, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to really get into some questions. Strategies to bridge the gaps. Educate to dispel myths. We're going to set the bridging tone right away, ask about pre-divorce gender roles in their relationship, ask about post-divorce goals as parents, create understanding about gender differences, and then brainstorm new ideas for parental involvement. Let's start with the education piece. It's often kind of squirrely because you want to kind of give some research, because people who've never been divorced before haven't sat down with their computer really and done a lot of research about what's best for their kids. They just know what they want. And so it's tempting for me as a therapist, which when I'm doing mediation, that's not my role. It's very tempting for me to want to go into all the child development stuff and all of that, because if I'm not careful, I could be setting things up to make it look like one parent should have custody over the other. And so we always have to be asking the question, can we educate, or does that cross over into competing role? Because your education can be perceived as biased. Can you think of a situation where that might be true? Where you can educate someone into thinking that you're on their side or the other side? What about that piece I just talked about with girls, young girls and their dads? I've had mothers tell me he's harsh with her, he's emotionally abusive with her. If I start going down the road of, well, but you don't understand, daughters need dads, and who's she going to think I'm siding with? So if I'm going to do any education at all, I do this with mediation, and I don't do court-connected mediation anymore, and this is harder to do when you're just showing up cold. When I know that I've got a couple coming in for private mediation, I shove all the research out of my can via email. Read this before you come to mediation, so that I'm not in the middle of my mediation giving them lots of pieces of information that sounds like I'm trying to favor mom having the baby over mom for overnight, or dad for overnight, simply because the research supports that it's best for babies. But we all know that it can't ever be all the time, right? All of the myths that I listed up there, you can think of someone who doesn't fit the category, right? It might be more true that, I'm trying to think of one that was up there now. It might be more true that men make more money than women on a normal basis, but can you think of anybody in your life, in your lifetime, where the woman made more money than the man in a relationship? Sure. It might be more true that women tend to be the single parent, stay-at-home moms, or more single parent moms than dads, but can you think of anybody in your lifetime that you've known? So it doesn't really matter that the research says so-and-so, that's informative, about what might be best for a particular age child, but we can always think of a situation or someone where that might not be true. So you have to be very, very careful in educating. So I think I have a notebook of things that I give to people before they come to mediation to educate them. Because that way I have no idea what they're going to bring in, and hopefully they can come in, and then when they start saying something, say, well, did you read anything about that? About that in the education material that I sent to you? And how does that inform you? And I find that that is helpful. So know the research, but also be sensitive to culture. Do you think different cultures will have different ideas about gender roles? What are some of the different cultural ideas about gender roles? And you're allowed to say it. We can all be honest about it. How about around religion? We're talking about the culture of religion. If you're Christian religion versus the Muslim religion, do you think there's differences in gender roles? One of the most poignant moments I had was with an Islamic man who came into my office for counseling, actually, because he had come to the parenting class, and he was so distraught because he just didn't understand how his wife could move here with him, file for divorce, get custody of the children, and he could only see his kids on the weekend. And he sat in my office and just shed these tears. And I felt with him, because it just didn't match his cultural idea, because I'm the man, and in my country, number one, she wouldn't have been allowed to divorce him, and number two, she would have never ended up with more time with the children. And it was a very, very difficult concept for him to process in his mind. And so you have to be mindful that people are going to be sitting in front of you that are totally blown away by the American culture and how divorces are, and what happens to children and all of that stuff. So make sure that you understand. And if you're not sure or you don't understand the culture, ask them to educate you, because there's no way we can all know about, So you can talk about that. Is there any cultural things that I need to know about your background before we get started? It might, and you may suspect based on race or religion or whatever, and so just ask the question, because I may need to be educated about that. And if you want to do that in caucus with me individually, I'm happy to do that with you, because as your mediator, I want to have complete understanding of what's going on. Setting the tone up front. Be real and talk about what everyone knows. I already said this to you, but women enter mediation with their mothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors' voices in their heads. You are a loser if you don't get custody. It's just how they feel. What kind of woman leaves the courtroom? The judge doesn't give you custody, you must have done something pretty bad. And so that is a big, heavy social pressure. Men enter mediation with the idea that the court is automatically against them. I am guilty until proven innocent. I say this right up front, and I ask them to leave their mother's, sister's, best friend's voice at the door, because nobody's going to need to read your agreement but you. This can be a confidential agreement unless your mother-in-law decides to go down to the courthouse and snoop, which she might, but you don't have to share this with anybody, because oftentimes people get these weird schedules that are maybe not, they might be 40-60, not 50-50. But no one needs to know what that percentage is. This is your family, these are your kids. So I try to encourage the mom to leave that at the door. It's not going to really matter what it says in the papers as much as how you're going to be a parent with these kids together, how you're going to co-parent. With the men, I ask them too to try to leave that bias at the door. And then I use that for the springboard of why mediation is such an awesome process. Because the minute they walk into that courtroom, they have no idea what judge biases they are dealing with. They have no idea. Maybe their attorney has clued them in because their attorney has experience with a particular judge over the other. But that's why I use that to say that's why I'm really glad you're here, because in this process, you can do whatever you want to do. We can be as creative as you want to be. We can be creative with the wording to a point, as long as the judge will accept it. And that if you don't settle here today, which is kind of a backdoor way of strong-arming someone, if you don't settle here today, you are putting yourself at risk for walking into a courtroom without knowing what the personal biases are of that judge. And so I'm here to just help you figure out how to take care of your kids. So let's try to keep those at bay and try not to be thinking negatively. Ask about pre-divorce gender roles. How did they structure their parental roles during the marriage or the relationship? What did mom do? What did dad do? If you think that, for instance, if you have a 12, 14-year-old and you have not had a relationship with that child, and then after the divorce you think you're going to start one, it's going to be hard. But the research tells us that if you already have a good relationship with that child, pre-divorce, post-divorce, that relationship shouldn't change much because you have less time. So time doesn't affect the nature of the relationship that was already set. So I do want to try to preserve somewhat of the kind of relationship that the parent had with the child prior to the divorce, mainly just for the kids to feel like it's somewhat seamless. But it's not tied to whether or not it's going to change the relationship. In fact, I tell people when I'm teaching the class, the best divorces, if there is such a thing, is when the kids don't feel any effective change in their relationship with either one of their parents. If anything, it should get better, because oftentimes parents divorce and they spend more quality time with their children than they ever did before because they have that one-on-one without the other parent. It should never get worse. If the relationship gets worse, the adults or the professionals are doing something wrong, because the kids shouldn't have to take a side. That's when the adults mess it up, right? They cause the kids to take a side. So I tell people this, I want to hear about what you've been doing so far. You know, if mom says that she's been the one that does the homework every night with the kids, and dad, he works late and he's got this job where he's out till 8 o'clock at night, and they're used to mom being there to help with the homework, well, okay, that's a good routine. It's working, the kids are straight A students, let's keep it going. And that makes sense. It makes more logical sense to do that than, okay, now we're going to split the baby in half. Just because dad or mom doesn't want less time with the kids, well, I want them on Tuesday and Wednesday, and you can have them on Thursday and Friday. Think about that as a child. Really? Especially if you got activities and your soccer shoes are over here and your basketball's over there, and where's my iPod? And kids tell me that, especially when they get to be teenagers. They're like, please, tell my parents this is crazy. I don't want to do that. And so you want to know what, and sometimes it is. It's the dad who has spent the bulk of the time doing the nurturing with the kids. Mom's maybe she has a weekend job, maybe she works at the mall. And it makes sense that dad's with the kids on the weekends. And mom's with them through the week. So I'm a big fan of trying to maintain the children's lifestyle as much as possible. Well, the absolute best case scenario parents can do is for the kids to stay in the home and mom and dad move in and out of it. That's called nesting. Have you heard of that? Now it takes you being able to maintain 3 homes. Some people live with a parent or whatever. When that gets screwed up though, is when somebody gets a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife, and they're like, it's not working for me. But that way the kids get to maintain and mom and dad just move in and out of it. But too often we get into that, let's split the baby in half because it feeds my needs. Let's talk about post-divorce goals. How would they like to be involved as parents in the future? Can they tolerate sharing a piece of their former role with the other parent? This is another gender role conflict. That I have my role as a dad, and this is what I do. Don't ask me to cook dinner. Well, now that you're going to be on your own, you're going to have to learn to do some of the things that the other parent did in-house. Same way with mom. You know, I'm used to doing these certain things, but that's his job. Well, not necessarily, and I find that that's very difficult for some people who, especially pre-divorce, they had structured their roles in a very traditional way. You know, mom stayed at home, dad went out to work, now she's got to get a job, and she has to decide or figure out how to do things a little bit differently. So talking about goals is really important. Sometimes I do that in the beginning as well. What do you want for your kids? Sometimes that helps you get a victory right away about this. Well, we both want them to go to college. Okay, you agree on something, yay. There's one thing you agree on, you want your kids to go to college. How are you going to get them there? We want our kids to have a religious upbringing. Okay, let's put that on the board. We want them to maintain a B or above average or B or A average in their schoolwork. Okay, how are you? So if I can get them to agree on some things, even if they're abstract things, at least that can bridge that gap a little bit between mom and dad. Also, just because it's important to maintain roles prior to what was going on before the divorce, that doesn't mean there's not opportunity, or it's not positive for there to be opportunity for the other parent to take on a different role after the divorce. So you want to encourage that as well, because there's really no logical reason that they can't. Brainstorming new ideas. Sorry. Jumped ahead. Great understanding. Gender differences are a part of life. Kids get something different from each of their parents. I already talked about this, and these differences are often driven by socially and culturally inspired gender roles. So again, the reason that mom or dad serve certain roles is because they've been socially or culturally preconditioned to do so, correct? And so do you think it hurts a child to realize that, oh, dad can cook too? No. Oh, mom's got to fix the flat tire. Do you think that bothers a child? No. But sometimes we worry as parents. We worry that they're going to see us differently, and that somehow that's going to be harmful to the child. So create understanding for, which is different than educating. You can ask questions in order to create some understanding. Brainstorming ideas with them is pretty important. You know, your job as a mediator is to help create options, right? It's a big part of your job. So you have to be the thinking person in the room. It was said here at the last session that when we're really angry or sad, I've done mediations because they were court ordered, that the night before, the mom found out about dad's affair. And how effective am I going to be the next morning in trying to get that person to think clearly? Probably not, but that sometimes you'll be thrown into a situation where there's that much anger, that much sadness, and when people are in that frame of mind, it really has a hard time thinking. And so you sometimes have to be the brain in the room. It's your job to keep the anxiety down in the room. And when anxiety starts to go up, you can't let yours go up with it. You have to be the one who's always kind of modulating that and monitoring the anxiety. So one way to do that is to start brainstorming some ideas, and so you have to kind of be able to think on your feet. What might work for this particular couple? Focus ideas on the needs of the children, not on the parents. I used this the other day, and it worked pretty well, because mom wanted something, and I said, well, help me understand. I don't understand why that's better for the kids. Sometimes, or oftentimes, I'll have them show me pictures of the children, and we'll put it in the middle of the table. You know, I just want them to remember, we're going to be talking about kids, we're not going to be talking about the needs of the parents. Minimize conflict while maximizing parental involvement. So when you're trying to help them come to an agreement, is this going to help you stay out of conflict or keep you in conflict? Because the conflict is about gender usually. It's about differences in parenting styles. It's about wanting to be seen not as the better parent, but just wanting to be a mom. I want the opportunity to be the mom that I always could be. I want the opportunity to be a dad. I'm afraid someone's going to take away my opportunity to be the dad that I want to be. So the conflict is usually surrounding that. So when you're putting together the parenting plan, you have to brainstorm ways of how you can minimize that conflict between the two parents and maximize their involvement, which that's an art form, and it's not always easy. And then draw on each parent's unconditional love for the children to create new opportunities for parental involvement. Because of these huge gender conflicts between mom and dad, they usually do see each other as the Antichrist. You can't possibly understand what I feel like, and so I often will say, you don't understand, he can't possibly love these children like I do. Well, I'll turn to dad or mom and I'll say, if push came to shove, would you die for your child? And what do I always hear? Absolutely. Well, that's unconditional love. And so I try to draw on them, I try to help them understand that they might not be the kind of parent that you think they ought to be, but they're a good enough parent maybe, and there's a lot of research on that too. And the conflict, the high conflicts I get into, I'll get a phone call. I'm going to take him back to court on contempt because he was 5 minutes late. Because that means he's a bad parent. If he was a good parent, he would show up on time. And I have to say, you know what? 5 minutes is 5 minutes. That doesn't make, call defects on it and see what they're going to say. Because if you can't call defects on it, it doesn't mean you're not going to get anywhere with it. And so it's important that I draw on that ability to be a good enough parent. Can this parent keep the child safe? Can they provide food, clothing, and shelter? And that unconditional love without hindrance. And if that's true, then you want to draw on those strengths, or at least create understanding about that. Here's some resources for you. I'm just going to keep those up there as we're going through questions if you want to write those down. Emory on Divorce is a great resource for you about parenting plans. I know this was about gender roles, but it all gets kind of thrown together. Robert Emory did a lot of research, and he came up with parenting plans that are a combination of considering the conflict level of the parents and also the age and development of the children. And based on those two things, has ideas about parent plans. And he also wrote The Truth About Children and Divorce, which is a pretty good read. Divorce Casualties, really, Douglas Darnell goes, this is an old book, but it's a classic, because he goes into all kinds of conflict that happens between moms and dads, and talks about parental alienation. Parenting Coordination, a Practical Guide to Family Law Professionals is kind of the primer that I use in my business, but what I like about that is just some really good chapters about child development, about research, about kids and parents, and advice on parenting plans. So that would be, if you're mediating, just to have some ideas to draw from. And then an old classic in 1991, this is a bibliography of edited research, but it's called Women and Divorce, Men and Divorce. You really want to read a lot about gender differences in divorce situations. So we've got, I think, 15 minutes, so I wanted to kind of just give you an overview and then see what questions you might have for me, and we'll go from there. So fire away. Yes?
Do you find that parents who go to like private mediation have like a lower level of conflict to just even get to private mediation rather than court order? Like, are they more ready to negotiate because they're agreeing to go to that mediation?
That depends. When I was doing court-connected mediation, one of the things I hated about it was the attorneys, because they show up and they're not there for mediation. They're there to do discovery. And they frustrate me because they would come in and, you know, my bottom line is this, you know, I'd have to call them in. There have been a couple of times I've had to throw them out of the room and say, you guys are a hindrance. I know you're an attorney, I hate attorneys. But in that setting, I never felt like they were really there for the right reasons. So then, when I started on private mediation, the classic call I would get was from Dad, and here I'm going to be gender biased. Dad would call and say, we want to avoid attorneys because he's got something to protect. He's afraid Mom's going to go out and hire a big shot attorney and take him for everything he has. So he wants to hire me to do mediation so we can avoid attorneys. And then he would become crestfallen when I would say, well, I would really like you to consult with your attorneys as you go through mediation, because I can't give you legal advice. And you don't want to make an agreement without knowing what your legal rights are. Oh, you mean you're going to tell her to consult with an attorney? Yeah. And then he would get upset. So, but I would still get some of those cases. But the answer to your question is yes. I think it's a good idea for them to come to mediation as private before they file for divorce, because I think it avoids a lot of conflict. You can set the stage for the post-divorce co-parent relationship that way before the court mucks it up and gets them all polarized and mad at each other. I can't really say whether those agreements are better than court-connected agreements. I don't keep, statistics on that. But my general feeling is that if they come in to private mediation before somebody files, by the nature of that couple, they are already on that path of low conflict. And my suspicion is, yes, they're going to adhere to the agreement more because of the nature of the kind of people that do what you described. Does that make sense? So that kind of common sense there, but not all private mediations are started for that reason. Like I said, sometimes trying to use me to get around the court system, and then I have to tell them otherwise. You had a question?
I was just gonna ask you, how do you deal with, obviously, almost every one of them has what children are used as some sort of leverage. How do you mediate or handle those?
This question was or many times, children are used as leverage. Do you mean leverage as, I'll pay you more child support if you give me more time with the kids, that kind of?
All of it, I guess.
Yeah.
Or it seems like every case there's some sort of child abuse alleged by somebody.
Yeah. Well, that's a different issue, child abuse. If someone brings up child abuse, in my opening statement, I'll say I'm a mandated reporter for child abuse, and if you disclose any type of accusation of child abuse, that could cause me to stop the mediation and call DBACs, because that would be my mandated role. And then if they do that, if they disclose that in private, I'm going to have to say, okay, I need to know how serious this is, because I may have to stop the mediation. If they're just blowing off steam, well, I don't really think it's abusive, because I'm always skeptical. He's abusing the kids, so he can only have them every other weekend. Well, I thought somebody was abusing my child, you're not going to get him for 1 hour. So that's how you kind of test whether somebody's really serious about the abuse. That's a red herring, basically. So I think abuse is a little bit, if someone's really serious as a mediator, I'm not going to try to get someone to compromise. I'm just going to say, okay, we have to stop the mediation, and then you have to be careful about how you stop the mediation, because what they just told you is also confidential. And then it's kind of squirrely how you go back in and say, well, I've learned some things, and I just don't think, this mediation is going to be appropriate for today. We may need to reschedule in the future or something. It's hard to do that without the suspicion of, I know what that's
Isn't
about.
that one element, though, that's not confidential under your ethics, that you have to?
As far as I understand, you're not allowed to disclose what they tell you in caucus without their permission. So they'll tell you that too. Don't tell him this, but so you have to be real careful about that. Any other questions? How many of you do divorce mediation now? Actively doing it? Private setting? Private? Or what court? What county? Okay, what's your name? Oh, okay, I've heard your name before. I think we've ever met it. But I don't remember. The name sounds familiar. So, anybody doing other types of mediation? Just general civil, the personal injury stuff, all that fun stuff? Yeah. Yay. Well, if you have no further questions, then that's all I have. I've got my cards up here. If anybody wants a card of mine, I'll be more than happy to hand that out to you. And I appreciate your time.